everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's so exciting to see so many people from all over the world join us as we celebrate our annual colour inspirations. So each year, the Ultrafabrics Colour Lab analyses new aesthetics in art, design and fashion to collate 5 distinct colour stories which really speak to the new consumer mindset. Today, we have invited a panel of design thinkers to discuss one of the key drivers behind these concepts. But first, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Emma, who will give a brief introduction into Unexplored Territories, our annual colour inspirations for 2022.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Emma Reynolds, and I look after the automotive design studios for Europe and Asia. Every year, I have the opportunity to share the Ultrafabrics colour inspiration. And so today I'm going to give you a brief introduction to our theme for 2022. We've titled this year's colour inspiration Unexplored Territories. It's about setting forth on a new journey, a sense of adventure despite countless unknowns. Whether it might be taking a leap of faith to pursue a new dream, or stepping out into the great outdoors, now is the time to assess alternative ways of being. Due to COVID, we've had this enforced period of time to reflect upon our needs and desires. We are perhaps more grounded with intention than ever before. And so for 2022, we present 5 concepts all focused on colour as the primary element in defining new spaces, new territories in both the physical and psychological aspects of design. These 5 concepts are Lust for Life, which celebrates an uplifting warrior spirit, La Mer, a concept that delves into our desire to explore nature and rediscover the outdoors. Metaphysical, which looks at how we can further connect with nature in new ways. Speed of Light, which fulfills the suppressed need for adventure that's been forced upon us by this pandemic. And then finally, we have Ultraviolet, and this will tap into that growing concern and sensitivity for wellness, especially within the digital realm. We hope that consumers will emerge from this pandemic with a newfound sense of optimism and adventure. The common thread running through these 5 concepts is a craving for experiences, for those unexplored territories which can engage the senses. So the designers and the sales teams from Ultrafabrics are looking forward to sharing this colour inspiration with you in 2022. Please feel free to contact us directly, or you can check out the handout that's in the toolbar section on the right-hand side of your screen. And so we look forward to seeing you and sharing this in the future. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy the panel discussion.
Thank you, Emma. So to celebrate the launch of Unexplored Territories, we wanted to delve deeper into this idea of re-engaging the senses to create experiences. At Ultrafabrics, we create materials that are comfortable, colourful and connect with the senses. This gives end users a moment of luxury, even if it's as simple as a desk chair. So we ask, if luxury is defined by the experience, and how can designers tap into senses to create experiences? We're delighted to be joined by Bethan Ryder from WGSN, Kaila from Jaguar Land Rover, Daniel Blaker from Nulty Lighting, Scott Richler from Gabriel Scott, and of course our own Barry Silverman. So Bethan, over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi everybody. I think the Unexplored Territories look spot on, I have to say. I love those concepts. I think we are all desperate for adventure. So we've had this long period of reflection, I think, where we've been starved of touch, we've been in lockdown, we've kind of been, I think definitely our sense of luxury has altered over the past couple of years. So I sort of wanted to kick off really as a nice icebreaker to the panel to ask you all what your sense of luxury is now, and I want you to try and do it in under 3 words. So I'm going to come to you first, Barry. What's your idea of luxury right now?
I'm going to use 3 words if that's okay, so forgive me, but I would say amplified sensory experiences.
Great. I like that you've kind of got the sense of all the senses there, with amplified being in sound as well as kind of things scaled up. Can I go to you next, Kaila?
Yeah, so for me it was really time in kind of all its sense. Humanity, being human, and also kind of meaningful and purpose.
Daniel, what's your sense of luxury now?
I think sincere, well-being, and engaging.
And you, Scott?
Sorry, Kaila, I'm going to say time as well. Time, craft, and a fuller experience.
I mean, if you think a couple of years ago, I think our answers would have been very different. I think time's particularly interesting. We've been talking a lot at WGSN about how time perception has changed over this period. But I want to go straight in to really talk to you, Barry, about how you feel Ultrafabrics ranges are kind of speaking to what you said your sense of luxury was, and that sort of that gentle tactility that I think we're talking about at WGSN at the moment, which is about that need for touch and colour and texture and all these things. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about how you feel Ultrafabrics is responding to that right now.
Sure. I could track back a little bit to what Emma was talking about relative to our color inspiration, which is genuinely guided by our culture and what's happening in our world today. And I think that, you know, the pandemic, which is on everyone's mind, and the impact it's had on our culture, I think is seriously guiding our design direction. And much of that is about the fact that we believe people want to feel something again. And feel something more deeply and in a very salient, meaningful way. So from an Ultrafabric standpoint, that opens up a whole suite of opportunity relative to texture and color and what we call our haptics in our hand. And so our desire to fulfill that need of consumers who are ready just to start feeling in a deeper, more meaningful way, I think is guiding a lot of our design process and our aspirations these days to, as I mentioned, create something that's more sensory and more meaningful to their whole experience.
And I'm really glad we've got Kaila on today, because I think what's very interesting about when you talk about kind of experience and obviously the sense of wanting to escape, obviously cars, mobility is of utmost importance. And the fact that with things like self-drive and lots of digital innovations, cars are kind of going to be more thought of as a kind of living pod, I guess, which we're sort of looking at a lot. And I just think it's very interesting that within that, Kaila, people are kind of moving away from just this sense that sort of walnut fur and leather is the only way you can get luxury or a feeling of luxury. And I wondered if you could sort of talk about how you feel that aesthetic is changing and how you see it changing in response to this kind of need for tactility.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really interesting one. And I think we work with a product which it takes us, if people aren't aware, kind of 3 to 5 years minimum to design it, sometimes longer. And so we don't necessarily start with like trends. It's kind of more movements, or what is the future luxury experience that those customers are going to want, and how can we engage kind of all the senses within our materials? How can we make them emotionally engaging? How can we have kind of a palette or a textile, for example, that makes it compelling and improve your well-being? But I think personally, sometimes I have like a love-hate relationship with automotive because it's so complex. It's had so many different elements you have to consider. In that way, it's amazing because every day I'm learning. You have to look at like quality, durability, all the things that you're talking about going forward. And I think that sometimes that's inherently like sustainable approach. Also, it's extremely challenging for us from a material perspective, getting something onto product. So as you were saying, the pandemic was kind of awful, but it also changed a mindset, and it changed a very luxury sector. And I think what's really interesting is that there's a lot of like unlearning to be done in automotive, but also like this huge area of a journey of progress. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about, is this kind of opening up of that journey of progress, and how we kind of look at the methods of make of our materials, and this kind of culture that we've seen come out of the pandemic of collaboration and collaborating together, and kind of businesses opening up, and this conscious design becoming kind of a hygiene factor and something that's very kind of needed now. So it's kind of that human-centric design for kind of a more meaningful approach to better solutions, and going to like a thoughtful state of the materials that are surrounding us within that vehicle, as you said, kind of inspired more by homes. And for me, on a personal level and as like a creative level, I think that is like wonderfully challenging in the automotive sector, and like really exciting. So it's kind of the whole concept of shifting a very traditional industry into that, for me, is kind of the most exciting element.
It does feel that there's a chance now to sort of turn it upside,
Yeah.
you know, completely throw it all up in the air and have more interesting textures and fabrics in cars. And I think it is an exciting time. But as you say, can be quite challenging. And this is where I want to go to you, Scott, because I think obviously JLR has very high net worth customers, as do you, Scott, with your furniture and lighting. And I wanted to just ask, with high net worth, are customers sort of demanding this new sensuality and softness in work? How is that manifesting in your products, this kind of change of the sense of luxury?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that the element of time that I mentioned before, I think, comes into play here, where there's a slowing down that occurred throughout the pandemic, as we all know, and so that slowing down also affected our customers' experience of I guess their own spaces, and also I guess their expectations of delivery, and also what's important to them. So I think that that slowing down made people somehow appreciate things like the story behind something, the way it's made, who made it, knowing that sort of other element, I think is another layer that gives texture to this whole experience, and that in itself is luxury. You know, like it takes a long time to make, you know, really good pottery or whatever it is, and I think that there was actually an absence of an appreciation of that before. I think luxury was tied to price point or to something really well polished, maybe something that had that sort of shine to it. I think that there's a change towards something a little more real, and I think that sort of segues into you know, craft and where things are made, how they're made, and the stories behind them, and also eventually into what we'll talk about later, which is the sustainability sort of angle. Clients they're not asking for sustainable items, but they are interested in quality in a different way than they were before, and also and I guess because they've had the time maybe to reflect on it, or think about it, or to live in their homes longer, and sort of understand what they're surrounded by.
And are you seeing within the home, in terms of sort of things that people are choosing, do you see a kind of like softness? I know we talked before, and you were talking about a lighting piece that you'd kind of softened. Is that changing your designs a little as well?
Yeah, I don't know if that's based on demand. I think that's maybe based on tendency or our own input, design input into that. But yeah, us as a design studio are moving towards the softness, and also maybe a little bit more texture as well in that softness. So it's not just a softness, but maybe some more investment into, for example, the treatment of the glass, or in the case of fabrics, something that has a little bit more a layered experience to it. So it's not just about the visual perfection. It's about the touch and the feel of things.
And Daniel, I know that your company provides lots of architectural solutions within projects. I just wondered how you're seeing these things change in some of the projects you're working on, in terms of, what kind of effects has the last 2 years had on how you're working?
Yeah, well, as predominantly an architectural lighting designer, so I guess the chief focus for us has always been sort of the lit environment, and having worked across all the sectors over my career thus far, including hospitality as one of the large players, there's a few different angles really in terms of how things have changed over the last couple of years. There's always that emotive relationship you share with the space. So, in any luxury environment, you sort of you have to shape and craft the space to make it, to give it a personality, to give it a character. And that was something that sort of is still, very prevalent. Some people say it's sort of it's the fourth dimension of architecture, the light that you sort of bring within it. And so that's something that we, have always sort of bear in mind. But the things that have changed over the last couple of years really are, I think everything's been, there's a need for things to be sort of slightly enhanced or slightly considered slightly further. I think exposure to a lot via almost remote viewing via the internet means that people's expectations of what is possible, what is available, and what is right or considered to be right have increased. So when we're sort of getting back out there, because that bar has been raised, I think that's something that needs to, manifest itself in the real world. And for lighting, as well as making everything feel as splendid as it can feel, people are more aware of environments that complement their body's natural, health and well-being. That's something that's become a big player. And as well as that, the sort of the environmental impact that lighting has. So perhaps that era of overzealous lighting, just lighting everything to the nth degree. I think people are aware now that that is potentially has ramifications, and so it's perceived as perhaps having a more negative connotation rather than sort of a celebration of something with all the bells and whistles. So responding to sort of the more energy specific focus of artificial lighting, we also need to consider perhaps everything, sort of the bigger picture, which is how things are manufactured, how things are procured, how things are supplied. And I think, as mentioned, I think sort of Scott touched upon it as well, but there's that sort of value in artisanal products, something that's been crafted. An expression I heard coined midway through the pandemic was lux cycling, which is kind of looking at what would be a luxury material before, and selling that, repackaging sort of recycled or repurposed in a different way to make it feel like it's something that should be celebrated rather than apologized for. And I think that's something that's week on week certainly, but getting more and more traction. And certainly in my field as a lighting designer, we have regulations in place. As an article called TM66, which came out last month, which is really looking at the entire life cycle from cradle to cradle of a lighting product's manufacture, from its whole carbon story. And so whilst things like this are sort of popping up, there'll be a whole new holistic review in the way that the design process happens.
Indeed, and long overdue. In fact, I just going into an office, which a lot of people aren't doing right now. When I have gone in, I've just realized how appalling the lighting is and how it doesn't make a nice environment. The overlit, strip lit kind of, you know, it all needs rethinking, I think. I'm really interested in also acoustics in environments, because I just think so often it's forgotten. And one thing that I really loved, slight aside, was when Tom Dixon, he launched his restaurant in Milan, and he had cork furniture, and it just had an incredible effect on the acoustics of that restaurant. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, really, with you, Barry, because I think people often forget about sound, and I think one of the lovely things that gets a feeling of luxury to me is a kind of lovely hushed sound or natural sounds, not the kind of like loud clatter. And I wondered if you consider this, Barry, when you're designing new ranges, and if that's part of the process when you're creating the fabrics.
Yeah, so we have an acoustics selection that actually is designed very specifically to contribute to that experience. And again, we're seeing the demand and interest in those type of products grow, I think exponentially, given the focus on experiences and how the environment is becoming so much more important to, you know, the work experience and what we want that to be. I think even now, when people are rethinking the office environment, which everyone has to, given the movement to a hybrid situation, we're going to see a completely new layout and design and new requirements around how people are communicating with each other, how they're reacting to sound, where they need quiet and where they don't. And certainly the fabric, and along with working with the walls and the design and the architecture itself, we're going to play a very big role in ultimately determining the contribution that acoustics makes to that new office experience. So I think we're going to see that continue to rise in interest and importance, and certainly will be reflected in our portfolio overall.
I think we've all mentioned sort of between us wellness, which is going to be a major concern. It already is for consumers, but even more so, I think, post-pandemic and going forwards into the future. And I think people are obviously also recognizing very much that physical and mental are bound up, and it's not just about being fit, it's actually your mental wellness as well. And I just wondered, Kaila, what sort of innovations are happening there that would improve the quality of experience in automotive? And are you thinking about that, and how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, wellness and well-being is one of our kind of 7 key principles, specifically for the Colour Material Organisation. And I think there's so many different layers to it. So like the first layer is obviously the senses and engaging that through the tactility of the material, which everyone's already kind of spoken about. But how do you create that space of serenity and calmness within a vehicle? How do things like the light come in, natural light, become part of our materiality? And then there's a way that you can play with inherent material properties. So for example, we have a wool textile blend with Quadrat, and wool is kind of naturally cooling, has those kind of properties. So if you kind of bring in those elements as well, and then air quality within the cabin is a huge area for us. So not only kind of engineering solutions that the kind of air is better and looking at kind of taking out bacteria specifically because of coronavirus, but how can your material choices or your coatings kind of affect that? So for example, the PU that we use has less kind of volatile compounds. And again, I think it goes back to this idea of what we've been discussing in terms of the craft of these materials, and going back to inherently natural and kind of less coatings will just improve that air quality and that kind of idea of well-being.
I mean, there's also, I think what's interesting, sort of touching upon wellness and wellness of planet and people. I think there are sort of moves in innovation that we're seeing, which is sort of, we've been talking about it at WGSN, called wearable temperature, where instead of heating a whole room, you might heat your garment, and that might be better for the environment. I'm interested in that as well, both Barry and Kaila, maybe Barry first. are you looking at the ways that materials might capture temperature and moderate temperature? Is that's clearly a concern, right? And you're looking at that and innovating in that area as well.
Yeah, very much so. Our materials are designed really to think and help control ultimately the temperature of the body. So one of the things that has becoming more important is to think about the space and the temperature around that individual and what controls it. So although we don't necessarily go into garments, the way that we cover seats or other areas of, say, a vehicle or even furniture, controlling that temperature is absolutely something that we're looking more at. I think today we're at a place where we could say that the way that our fabric is made and constructed, it actually contributes to the controlling of that temperature in terms of how you feel, how your body ultimately feels. And I would say in the future, we begin to look even more closely at things such as temperature control as that becomes more important. But to some degree, we're already there.
And is that something, Kaila, that is, within, I know that JLR's, I think, decided by, is it 2030? What are your targets with the whole, setting targets from COP26? I believe with Ultrafabrics, it's to be sort of 100% bio-based or recycled materials by 2030. What kind of, do you have similar sort of, what have you set at JLR for things like this?
I think there's kind of targets overall. We have now the materiality platform, which highlights kind of a platform where we talk about very much a journey of progress. It's kind of specifically designing on terms of design for meaningful better solutions. So whether that's kind of this idea of how you can design sustainably through durability. So we have like a satin wrap on the external of our vehicles, which is basically scratch recovery technology. So not just sustainability in terms of, yes, it has less kind of waste compared to traditional paint methods, but also looking at durability. Again, how we look at weight is a huge thing for us. So the introduction of textiles, like that's over 50% lighter than, for example, a leather. But also, where do they come from? So if the textiles is made from eucalyptus, that requires less water to grow. They come from FSC certified places. And I think it's just the idea that we're on a journey. So the biggest impact at the moment that we're trying to capture is not using virgin materials, making sure that we're kind of on this journey to zero waste. And we have that with the Econel carpets, for example. So there's lots of elements, and I think everyone will understand on this call how sustainable is a journey, and the fact that you have to be really careful with designing in sustainability when you're doing a really complex product, because suddenly you can start to go kind of greenwashing very easily if you don't do it in a very holistic, thoughtful way. And I think that's our main priority as a team, is how can we be authentic in what we're doing and make sure we're making those small steps.
That is very important, and I know this is one of the things that we've been talking about a lot, that consumers really do need authenticity and transparency now, and it's come to be expected, and that it is so complex that I think all anyone can ever be is on the journey, as you say, because there's so many moving parts that you're trying to think about. I love the bio-based material innovations that are happening around design, with things like Mexican corn husks with Fernando Lapos and all these kind of things. I wondered, Daniel, first, and then maybe Scott, are you exploring these kind of innovations? Are you excited as I am, like about mycelium leather and things like this?
You stole my mycelium leather. I was going to say mycelium. I was like, surely no one's going to say mycelium. Yeah, there are quite a few things. I mean, obviously there are certain performance characteristics that come with, lighting as a product. Obviously the net, making everything as net zero as possible and offsetting everything is fundamental. So sourcing locally, things like that. In fact, for me personally, the biggest driving factor is I represent there's a forum of people called the Green Light Alliance, who are bringing together really the people who leading the dialogue on these subjects. It's a forum for discussion and awareness. And one thing that sort of comes over more and more is really just that the reuse of things is probably the best way to sort of go about solving this problem, and not, making everything disposable. If it is disposable, make it, assemble it in such a way, produce it in such a way that it can be easily repurposed or reused and broken down, and minimize transportation costs. But if things are sort of made out of fantastic things, bamboo, there's some light fittings now that are made out of bamboo, which is wonderful. Just have to make sure that the material they're made out of is suitable for, isn't going to become a hazard as a material. So ideally minimizing how many components. But I think touching upon all these things, as you mentioned, there's so many wonderful new possibilities out there. It doesn't feel, for me anyway, it doesn't feel as though there's any sort of compromise to be made. It feels like a really exciting avenue that isn't going to inhibit design and creativity. It's just going to do what perhaps reinforced concrete did for architecture many years ago. It's just going to give you a whole new bunch of opportunities to explore and give you a new focus. And so in that way, it's quite exciting.
Scott, I know that you work in very sort of noble materials like sort of bronze and glass and lovely timbers and things. Are you going to look at sort of strange and new innovations with materials, or are you kind of like, because of the durability of these classic materials, you think that's kind of good enough in a way?
I think it's a double-edged sword. You have, I think of it in two ways. So Daniel mentioned what I think is the most important aspect of it is the possibility to reuse. I do think that is probably it's the most important, and it's the less greenwashing sort of way of doing this. We're saying you can legitimately either reuse it because it's reusable, because it lasts that long, and even if you do refit the project, these pieces can move on to either another project or another location. So there's that. Glass that we use, I mean, we could take all our waste if we want, crush it up and start over, make new pieces. So I think that's a friendly enough material in that way. But this whole thing about moving forward with new materials, it's funny because we're actually exploring some materials that are actually, I would not qualify them as new, I would qualify them as old with new technologies. So, things like ceramics, clays, and earthy materials like that actually come from the earth and can return to the earth, but built in a maybe sort of like, built in a way or using technology that's available today to be able to produce quality pieces like that. So or shortening, for example, the curing period for something. So yes, we're looking at new materials, but not maybe in the same sort of technologically advanced way. Maybe, in my case, think of it as a return to more basic materials that are very sustainable and very long lasting, and that have very, very little impact. And then of course, like I said, return to reuse.
There's definitely, I think you're right about not old materials, but if I use the example again of the cork, and something we're seeing a lot coming back is bast fibers, like your jute and your linen, because they're kind of regenerative and this kind of thing, and good for the soil. So yeah, back to the 70s in some respects. But I mean, we've talked a little bit about circular design being so important, and obviously end of use. So I know that you're already animal free, Barry, which as a vegetarian makes me very happy. But what other kind of areas, are there any other areas you can talk about that you're exploring, or is it all kind of like until a range is finished, you can't give anything away about where you might be looking for new sources of material to make your fabrics?
Sorry, notice the product placement there. Diet Pepsi will have to send their check later. No, we can talk a little bit about that. What I was thinking about as I heard others talk was interesting to me, and I'll answer your question directly, but I wanted to make this point because I think the idea of sustainability, as we're talking about, also translates to this idea of luxury, which is changing if you think about it, the whole concept. And there was a time, and I think this is where Jaguar Land Rover got it very right, in that it used to just mean like super comfortable, but now it means smart. You know, it's this extra element. You can't be luxurious anymore. At least we believe, and I think a consumer movement towards this idea is that you have to be smart too. You can't just be comfortable, and that means doing something that's good for the world, that's good for the planet, that doesn't exclude luxury items. So from our standpoint, you know, we very much are looking at those things, and there's the what we're doing today and what we're doing tomorrow. And you know, today all of our things revolve around what I refer to the 4 Ps: our purpose, our product, our process, and our plan. And just because I love alliteration, I was able to get those P's in there. But purposely, we actually have clear goals. We have products that deliver on that, on those goals today. Our process is getting more and more sustainable, and there's a plan for the future. Now, to answer your question, the plan for the future, there are things that we're looking at that involve things like mushrooms, for example, you know, to look at how products are created. And our goal, of course, is by 2030 to be completely bio-based. So we have to look at these bio-based products or elements that are in the world today and figure out how we could possibly take something from a mushroom and create a product from that. We're looking at things first, of course, in terms of our backcloth, and are there corn-based items that we could use, of course. So it's really about leveraging nature better, I think. And we're already in discussions with companies that are doing those things. This is a process and it takes time. My guess is over the next few years, we'll try to accelerate that because it certainly is where the world is moving. And, you know, as I said, by 2030, we have some very aggressive goals.
And I think also that it's shifting so much that actually people need more and more to talk about being kind of carbon positive. And it's not just about neutrality anymore, right? It's about regenerative, and it's about far more than just, you know, people want to be putting back in the soil, hence things like some of these things we've been talking about that are going to become increasingly popular. I do think you're right, that I think I'm almost wondering whether luxury today basically means something beautiful and well crafted that doesn't harm the planet, and it's the kind of guilt-free conscious consumption, which I know we've talked about before when we were having this discussion. I just wondered if you're kind of recognizing that a lot in what your customers kind of asking and wanting for. I just wonder, Scott, do your clients, is sustainability on their brief to you when they ask for something? Where is it coming in? Because the argument was always that, oh, people don't care, they just want something they want. But I sense that that's possibly, hopefully changing.
I think it circles back to the discussion or to what I said in the introductory question you asked me. My clients aren't specifically first of all, they're not necessarily asking it in the same technical sense that you know, Jaguar Land Rover would ask, you know, or what their brief would be. I think our clients are being more considerate of what they're investing in, and they're not investing in, like I said before, it's not anymore just about the bling and the visual satisfaction and it's really about owning something and the story behind it, and that contributes to I think both the sustainability story and the bit about luxury and how those two things are tied together today, because people are they're caring about what they're buying, and they're much more willing participants in that process and in the story behind it. So I think in a much more basic way, that leads you down the right path without getting too technical about it.
Just going to jump in, and also
Daniel, go on. Yeah.
I thought I'd just put my hand up, but also for this sort of fields, this avenue of luxury as well, it doesn't feel as though it is, you know, quite a left, you know, sort of hippie movement to go more green at this point in time. It very much is part and parcel with, you know, synonymous with luxury. No one feels like it's a compromise anymore. you know, in the sense of automotive, you know, an electric car now is, you know, the 0 to 60 time of an electric car is far and above anything that you'd get typically for, you know, anything equivalent. And so it's not sort of at counter odds to luxury. The two things, I think luxury is almost being led by some of these new ways of thinking.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, I think of how aspirational an electric car is. I can't afford one yet. I'm hoping that they'll come down in price, but I've just got rid of my car as the alternative. But I do think that, yeah, Kaila, you want to say something? You're going to give me a car? No.
I wish I could. I wish I had one myself. No, I think it's like, I just want to add that I think we're seeing, not just in automotive, but I'm talking about the luxury sector in total, like customer is incredibly discerning, and not just about materials, but about the kind of sustainability of people and like the kind of cultural element of it as well. And they kind of expect it now, and I think they expect a brand to do it. That's kind of my feeling. And also this kind of legislation that's coming into place, I think will really push that, I hope, in a kind of very good way. Like I read this really interesting article that was saying that kind of Amsterdam giving you vouchers if you return some clothing for repair. And so I think we're going to start seeing kind of different legislation, and hopefully countries kind of building on the customer.
I think resale certainly in fashion and in furniture is a big retail model which is going to grow and grow for sure. I wanted to, I don't have a huge amount of time left. I was going to ask, when you work with all these partners, Barry, I was interested in that kind of two-way sort of design process, and when you kind of, are you learning from working with JLR, for example, about what you need to innovate and how that kind of, because it's two ways, you're not just sort of, they're not just specifying your fabrics, you're presumably looking at how they're using them and thinking about where you need to find gaps and things.
Yes, that's very true. You know, we have a division or a group that just focuses on custom products. So when we work with a JLR or many of our transportation clients, it's a very collaborative process because we have to understand from them their goals, their ambitions, their needs, where their consumers are moving, and we work to often customize a product that meets those specifications. That collaboration is very important. Oftentimes it starts with us bringing something like a color trend report, like Emma was talking about at the beginning. So we might talk about, this is where we see movement in the world of color. This is what's happening around us. And that then inspires a conversation with our customers regarding their needs. So it's very collaborative. It's a wonderful process where we contribute, of course, both the trends, the movements, the forces in the world, along with their customer needs to arrive at a product that really works well, given our abilities and what we do, of course.
And there's nothing more evocative than color. I mean, I think there's some stat out there that says that it determines what people buy by something like 80%. I mean, don't quote me, but it's some incredibly evocative thing. I just, as a final kind of, there's one final question. This is a penultimate question. There's obviously, you can't move for hearing about the metaverse, right? Certainly at WGSN, I think because of Facebook being renamed Meta, there's been a lot of discussion about it, and there's a lot of discussion about digital innovation and how important gaming is sort of bleeding into many industries. And I just wondered, it's sort of obviously affecting how we view the world. On one side, we want to kind of escape our screens, but on the other, there's this sort of incredible sense of adventure as well. How are you seeing that kind of crossover? And I wanted to go to you, Kaila, but it might be something other people on the panel want to comment on. But how is it, do you look at that when you're researching things in terms of CMF and how digital might affect what you're using in real life, or IRL as we call it?
Yeah, I think I'm laughing because personally it makes me feel really old when I think about it in metaverse. I don't know why. I just think I'm a bit old, but I think it's really interesting. Kind of in that sense, now I'm going to sound really old, but it reminds me of like the internet. Like people didn't really understand its potential, and I feel like it's kind of that at that stage. So of course, you know, we look at everything, every kind of materiality, whether that's kind of scent, light, digital. I think it's really important, like everything, this hybrid of, is it designed with human needs and desire in place? Like, it's not gimmicky. Why are you designing it? Why is it in there? Is it going to enhance an experience? Is it part of the integrity of the design? I think those are all the questions that are kind of coming out from these conversations. And the bits that I'm really excited about in terms of color materials, I think we're a really secretive discipline. I think you're probably all aware of that. So it's kind of opens up avenues to start communicating our work, our kind of color material journey to an audience and bringing intimacy in that way. So for me, for example, my colleagues have worked on kind of a materiality platform and done kind of videos, and they've started to be communicating. And I think this hopefully opens up avenues of those kind of communications and building intimacy with a brand. And that's kind of the initial stages, which I am personally quite excited about. But yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of potential, like any material, but it just has to be like anything designed in with that purpose in mind.
I mean, we're seeing a lot of colour coming through that that is kind of not inspired by digital, but like the colours that you could see in a digital environment, they'd work really well in a digital environment and real life, like whether that's sort of metallics or a hyper kind of saturated colour. Is that something, Barry, that you, when you're coming up with your new colour ranges, would you say that our exposure to screens is affecting what we want to see off screen with colour?
You know, it's interesting. You know, color is in the public domain. It belongs to everyone, you know, so we have to find inspiration from what is out there, and the digital world is out there. And honestly, I don't think I've seen the digital world necessarily inspire a color direction, but certainly it absolutely has to factor in, because you have to work within that world. The inspiration that I've seen, I think, in terms of the new colors that we talk about or put out for us, of course, are driven by, you know, simple needs, consumer needs. But there's often things like nature, for example. Our natural world has been a big inspiration for us relative to where a color or design inspiration can come from. So those are the type of things, I think, that act primarily as the inspiration, with the caveat that we now have to work within so many different mediums. And, you know, I wouldn't say that limits us, but if anything, maybe that opens us up, but it's definitely a consideration.
Okay, I've got a final question for everybody. I'll come to you first, Daniel. If experience is the new luxury, I want you to tell me your ideal luxury experience. And it could be anything, having a bath.
Well, I didn't have time to prep for that question, Bethan. My ideal
do you want me to go to
luxury.
someone else first?
No, it's fine. I think my ideal, I mean, it's kind of going to be ironic from a sort of a lighting designer, but a luxury experience normally it's just like an environment that you feel, you know, is you know, in some capacity rejuvenating yourself. So it doesn't have to be an artificial one. It could be, you know, on a beach and a holiday. I think for me, really, it's just about, you know, a depth, something, you know, something evocative. So it could be a bath, but it's a space in which you're feeling something. And I think the danger we have is with a lot of spaces, we tend to sterilize them with lighting, especially our interior spaces, with our office spaces. And I think, you know, as long as you're having an emotion, well, hopefully a positive one, as long as you're having a positive emotion in a space, you know, whether it be a bath or a sunset, they're my luxury spaces, feeling something. And I think with this whole metaverse thing, I think there's that, you know, we're going one step. You know, it's sort of everything's sort of almost becoming more and more sort of two-dimensional, in the sense that people use their phones all the time. You know, I'm definitely a victim of that. You know, there's only one texture on your phone screen, despite what you're looking at. You know, you're not you know, you're not touching the bark of a tree anymore, being outside playing. You're not sort of getting as dirty as you would once get. So there's a disconnect with nature that you sort of just, you're not as exposed to it as you would have been once. Even a book, you know, texture of a book or the smell of a book. And I think that sort of sensory kind of system, feedback system, where the tactility, the environment, how it's lit, how it smells, how that forms a memory, I think that's sort of intrinsic with us. You know, there's a system that's, you know, predisposed. We're predisposed to understand in order to operate. And I think slowly those things are being redacted. And I think it's important that we try and become more aware that we need to, you know, provide that texture to experience something properly.
I think it's very fitting that you have a plant in the background, because we've been talking a lot about biophilic design and this kind of like how that can affect our wellness, and yeah, there's another one, and wood and nature basically. So in that case, Kaila, would it be forest bathing for you? What would be your luxurious experience that you could think of that would tap into all your senses?
Yeah, I think that everyone was, you know, really affected by the pandemic, and even kind of I found myself almost being more materialistic, but like in a positive sense, if that makes sense. Like I want better, but I want less. I mean, I was really privileged in the pandemic, don't get me wrong, but I also had a baby and went back to work, and kind of was trying to juggle this new environment. So for me, I think any luxury experience at the moment kind of is really about something involving kind of deep restorative self-care and sleep. To be honest, I think that's probably true for all of us. Like this sense of like well-being really coming out of this pandemic, and I think we all have a story about how it affects us and how it changed our connotations of luxury and a luxury experience. I think would be fair to say.
I think yours is the bath.
Scott,
yeah, mine is the bath. I love the bath.
Scott, are you chiming with everybody else? Are you feeling exactly, is this a communal need to go and bathe in nature?
I guess so. I think I would say that the ideal luxury experience for me hasn't changed. I think it's always been, there are few things in the world, they change for you as you grow, that allow you to connect to the moment. The moment meaning that moment in time to enjoy whatever it is that you're engaging with. So if it's the ultimate one is, you know, sitting on a surfboard in the ocean and really like feeling that small and understanding your place, and everything else disappears. But the daily ones are engaging with, you know, a piece of art or something that creates that conversation that brings you away from all the other things, you know, your bills, your bank account, your business, and all that in that moment where you can engage in the moment. And I think whatever it is that does that for you, and I think those things change for you, different things bring you to that moment. But I think that's, if you can live in there, that's luxury.
Can I steal Scott's one? That surfboard one's good. I mean, I can't surf.
The surf one is good.
My surfing is poor, but I can sit on a surfboard and love that moment so hard. I'm good at that.
I think we all, there's definitely a feeling that if I think of a couple of designers, I know Yves Bihar and Nico Zupans, they both are surfers, and they're both incredibly tapped into sustainability and the, you know, cleaning up the oceans and all this. And I do think we all need to be a little bit more surfer. Barry, do you think we need to be a bit more surfer?
Well, I don't know. I've never surfed. I probably never will, but I respect and appreciate what it actually is and can be for people. But I'm going to answer your question a little differently, and maybe a good way to end about this theme of the experiences, the new luxury. But it plays on what both Daniel and Scott and even Kaila had said relative to, you know, wanting to feel something again, which I think is the new luxury. The New York Times did an article just recently about the fact that smoking is on the rise again. And interestingly, although that's bad for us overall, they attributed it to the fact that people have just felt so confined that they just want to break out and feel something different again. And I think for me, the idea of luxury is very much about experience. And so for me, what would be luxurious is going to a rock concert again, and not worrying at all about the fact that the people around me could give me a deadly disease. The fact that that won't enter my mind, and I could feel completely relaxed in an environment that I miss desperately, I think would be a luxurious experience for me. And then the fact experience finding luxury, which I think is what we're going to find going forward.
Yeah, the Roaring Twenties, but with a real sustainable wellness kind of lens. Beautiful. Yeah, right. Brilliant. Thank you. I think we've gone a little bit over. I don't know if there's any questions coming in, or if anyone would like to.
No one's there, but no one's there. It's just
no one's there. We're talking to a vacuum.
Yeah. It's been nice.
It would be nice if anyone's out there and they want to ask any of our panel anything.
We did have just a couple of questions. I think one was for Barry. They were asking if you could repeat the 4 Ps or the 3 Ps that you mentioned as far as Ultrafabrics' approach to sustainability.
Sure. The approach is the 4 Ps: purpose, product, process, and plan. And if you could fulfill all of those elements, which we try to do, you've got a good sustainability program.
Great, thank you. We had another question on, in a world where every surface now needs to be cleanable, how can designers bring texture into their space? I don't know who would want to jump in on that.
That's a hard one.
It's a tough one.
Looks like Kaila.
I would kind of take it back. Does every surface need to be cleanable? And I think this kind of goes back to like a use case scenario, and do we actually need kind of a combination? So yeah, I think it's that kind of question that, yeah, going forward, will we want everything to be cleanable, not have any texture? I don't think I would agree with that personally. So yeah, I think it's this idea that, yeah, the areas that you touch, you might want to clean, but I think there is areas that you need to see visually, and they can have this nuance and depth visually that can add to something that is not necessarily something that you need to touch. I don't know if anyone else disagrees with me on this panel, but I think there's space for both.
It's all about clever design.
Great, and Kaila, there was a request for you to repeat your moment of luxury. I think that was missed. Yes.
My moment of luxury, it's kind of quite boring, but my moment of luxury is basically just anything that involves like deep restorative self-care. Because I basically had a child in the pandemic and went back to work, and I think I actually have the anti of Barry's. Like I have no desire to go back into any sort of concert. I'm like quite happy to have some space and time at home.
I think the outcome should be that we all need to go surfing together. I think that's the next thing we need to do.
Yeah.
Field trip.
I think that Californian state of mind is definitely interesting.
Well, I was thinking North Devon, Bethan. I wasn't thinking California.
No.
But, you know.
I need to leave.
Sorry, I wasn't thinking about the air miles. It's interesting though that social sports are massively up, and things like skateboarding and surfing and all of these things. And I think it's interesting that they were in the Olympics, which obviously made people, but it's the fact that they're roller skating, they're social sports, right? They're not competitive sports. And I think that's interesting that has happened as well and come out of the pandemic. But anyway, a funny note to end on. Any more questions? No? I think time's up. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I thought that was definitely gave me lots of food for thought, and I think our next panel discussion is definitely going to have to be on surfboards while you're surfing. I can't wait.
Mycelium surfboards.
Yes, absolutely. So one last quick thing, if anyone is interested in booking our Unexplored Territories presentation, do get in touch. But otherwise, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully you've got a chance to indulge in a moment of luxury. But thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.